I was born in Britain. I now live in Finland with my Finnish wife and my family, my daughter here. But I started out life as an engineer, mechanical engineer. That's how I trained, a degree qualified mechanical engineer in the UK. And then I joined the Air Force, and I became an Air Force pilot. And for 10 years, I flew aircraft for the Royal Air Force in Britain. After leaving there, I worked for an aerospace company for a while as a program manager. And then I set up my own business, engineering design consultancy, specializing in something called finite element analysis, which is analysis, design work, mechanical engineering design work, working on all kinds of structures, such as aircraft undercarriage systems, nuclear power station decommissioning, oil and gas platforms, defense, military aircraft design. We worked on the Joint Strike Fighter, for example. I did that for a few years. And then, unfortunately, the 2008 crash came along, and I had to close that business, which was unfortunate. Something I built up from scratch. It was my own baby, my own idea, but I had to say goodbye to that. And at about the same time as that happened, my daughter came into this world, and my health was getting really bad, actually. If you go to this, if you're online, you can actually go look at lihfliving.com about and look at my before and after pictures of what I did to lose weight and regain my health. I was severely overweight at the time. And I, like many people, I didn't really understand what was happening. I didn't really know why I was getting more and more obese, and I needed to make a change. And by the way, if there's any questions as I go through this, I don't know how long we've got. I think we've gone for an hour. I think, Fateh, if there are any questions, please ask in the chat, and I'll be happy to ask as we go along, and Fateh can shout them out. I can't see the screen very well from this distance, but you know, if there's anything that's unclear, please ask. So yeah, I then started my blog. I wanted to try and lose some weight and get my fitness back, and I started my blog in 2010. It's been going 10 years now, which is quite amazing. I never thought it would last 10 years, but here we are 10 years later, 2020, and it's still going, and it's getting more and more interest, I'm glad to say. And it was during this time that this sort of health transformation that I started to really get into the... Hello? Is my screen still there?
We can hear you.
Yeah, sorry. Okay, you're showing that. That's good. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, that's good. So I'll just move away from the whiteboard at the moment. That's my before and after picture. Yeah, that's great. And as you can see, in 2010, I had a lot of problems. I didn't know anything about health at that time. I knew very little about nutrition. I knew even less about physiology, blood markers, and all that sort of thing. I just took my health for granted, really, and as you can see, it wasn't working, and I was getting very, very sick. I had the reflux syndrome that you get when you're actually throwing up in bed at night, which was very scary. I was 25, 30 kilos heavier than I am now, and it was just all going wrong, and I had to make some changes. So I started. A friend of mine was actually a doctor, and he introduced me to something called low carb, and I started to read some books on that. From Finney and Volek, the quote that I had on the whiteboard there was lifted from their book, The Art and Science of Low Carbohydrate Living. So I read that, and then I started to try and lose weight via low carb. And that was all well and good, but if you go to progress on my site, Fateh, if you can see that, my journey, you can actually see a graph on there.
Yeah.
You can bring that up. I don't know if you can.
It'll take me a couple of minutes.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. There's a graph on there of my weight loss, and what happened was, as I cut the carbohydrates, thinking this would be easy and my weight would start to come down. Yes, it came down a little bit, about 6 kilos, and then it stayed there. And I couldn't work out why this was happening. I just didn't understand why, if I cut the carbohydrates, why wasn't I losing weight? And I spent about 2 months trying to investigate this, and I realized there was only one thing left that was, I'd eliminated everything basically, eliminated carbs, and I was trying to experiment and find out what was blocking my ketosis, what was stopping me from losing weight. And eventually the only thing left was dairy. And when I dropped the dairy, it was like a huge moment for me. The weight started flying off at 2 kilograms a week, and I never looked back. And I lost 10 kilos in a month. That's it there, yeah. It's a great little graph. As you can see, that B to C segment there was my plateau. I lost from A to B was cutting carbs, and B to C was the messing around for about, I don't know, 2 months, I think, trying to find out what was going on, and weight wasn't coming off. And I actually thought, well, this low carb thing's rubbish. It doesn't work. It's not working for me. But as soon as I found out that it was dairy, the weight started to come off, and it stayed off ever since, I'm glad to say. So for me, it's not really about a macro. It was when I started to see that dairy was the problem. Dairy doesn't contain much carbs at all. Milk has got some lactose in it, but compared to sugar, it's nothing. And so for me, it was the question was, why is this happening? Something in dairy was inflaming me, and my investigations point to casein and something called casomorphin. So I'm not going to dwell on the dairy aspect right now, but that was the trigger that led me to believe that this is an inflammatory problem. This is inflammation, not necessarily a single macro problem. And so I started to look at inflammation. So my whole thing is not to target low carb per se, because everybody has a different tolerance to carbohydrate. Somebody who's young in their 20s can take a lot more. Sorry?
How old are you?
I'm 54.
54. Great.
Yeah, 54 this year. And so, a lot of people can take carbs, some people can't. But my idea is that we have to find something that works for us, that will target inflammation and bring inflammation down, so that we can get into ketosis. This thing here, this sentence here, that Finney and Volek wrote in this book, The Art and Science of Low Carbohydrate Living, says it all. What is inflammation? Frankly, it might be easier to explain the meaning of life, because it is such a complex subject. It is, the more you look into it, just some of the things, the traditional markers that people talk about in inflammation. If we take the human and we look at what inflammation means for that, as an engineer, I like to compare the human to a car, because we're both thermodynamic engines. We both rely on a fuel coming in, and in the case of the car, we have performance coming out, if I can spell. And we also have things like, we have, as well as the performance, we have chemical outputs such as carbon and CO2 and H2O. And if this is going wrong, if we put the wrong fuel in the car, if we put diesel in a petrol car, we put petrol in a diesel car, we're going to get poor performance, and we're going to get some really bad output. We're going to get some really bad, nasty things coming out of the exhaust. And that's how I see humans. The only difference between humans, we also have performance. So and that's what I do in my company, Ultimate Fitness, which is a company I formed about 2 or 3 years ago to measure gym performance. We can measure that in the same way as we can measure the speed of a car, how much horsepower it's outputting, etc., etc. And we can also measure things that are coming out of the exhaust, if you see what I mean, the exhaust in humans. And those are the blood tests that I'll talk about in a minute. And the other thing, of course, the big difference between a car and a human is that part of what we eat doesn't just go to performance and the output of the markers that we can measure, which I'll write down in a minute. We can also, part of it also goes to repair and growth, of course, which makes us much more complex than the car or an engine, because we have the ability to repair ourselves. The car doesn't have that ability. So we can measure performance, we can measure output, the chemical outputs for a car, we can measure performance for with humans, which is what I do in the gym with my company, Ultimate Fitness, FI, and we can measure the outputs, the inflammatory markers, which are the equivalent of the carbon and the H2O that we have in the car. So if these inflammatory markers are not playing ball, or there's something wrong with them, we're going to see degradation in repair and growth, and we're going to see a degradation in performance. And so I see the human as an engine, albeit a much more complex one than the car. Okay, one that's able to repair itself and is able to divert some fuel to repair and growth, which the car can't do. But we can measure performance, and we can measure these inflammatory markers, which we'll talk about in a minute. Okay, does that make sense so far, Pater?
You mean exactly by inflammation? Why it happens? Why it's a natural?
Well, okay, yeah, good point. Inflammation. So inflammation. Before I wipe this, inflammation is incomplete combustion. So when the car isn't working properly, and you put the wrong fuel in, you have incomplete combustion, and your performance for your car will drop, and the lifetime of the car will go down. The engine won't last very long, okay, if you put the wrong fuel in. The same with the human. If we put the wrong fuel in, inflammation is going to go up. Inflammatory markers will go up. So for me, the analogy is that these inflammatory markers, which I'll talk about, are incomplete combustion for humans. When we're putting the wrong fuel into the human, we're going to get...
But specifically, are we talking about our cells, our organs, our tissues that are inflamed as a result of this process?
Everything. If we're putting the wrong fuel in, we're going to get poor repair and growth, and we're going to get signs of inflammation, which I'll talk about. I'll talk about these markers. You're going to see people gaining weight. Okay, insulin's going to go up. You're going to start getting fat deposits, which is the equivalent of your engine getting coked up. Okay, so your engine's not going to work. So your engine is not firing on all cylinders. It's not working properly. All right. Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes
sense. We have to put the correct fuel in. So the big question is, what's the correct fuel? How do you determine the correct fuel for humans so that you're running a clean engine and the inflammatory markers are all okay? And that's the big question. That is the debate that we're all having, is what should we eat? What is it that we should be eating?
Nick,
Sorry?
before that, there was a question. What was the name of the book that you mentioned at the past? Okay, Low Carbohydrate Art and Science of Low Carbohydrate Living. Yes, I'm going to.
Yeah, that was the first ever book I read on low carb, and inflammation is discussed in there. And it is a huge question. If you ask one doctor what is inflammation, or 10 doctors, what is inflammation, you're going to get 10 different answers.
Yeah. I think one thing that it's important to say is that conditions like diabetes and hypertension are referred to medically by doctors as chronic inflammatory states. So
Yes.
it's in the name. Like if you Google it right now, you'll find doctors call these chronic inflammatory states. And again,
Yes.
on the landing page, I shared the article that more and more they're finding that inflammation is a common symptom in cancer, in heart disease, in every.
Well, this is what happens when you have poor fuel. We see the five diseases of civilization. So we see cancer. I mean, not all cancers are related to nutrition, but some definitely are. We see cardiovascular disease. We see dementia. We see diabetes. And we see stroke. So we can see, even if we disagree on what is inflammation, we can certainly see inflammation. I think everybody now agrees that inflammation sits behind these 5 diseases to some extent or another.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So that's that. Any questions on this before I move on to the next thing?
No, I think we can move on.
All right. So that's where I'm coming from. And I'm not a doctor. All I'm interested in is knowing what works. So I'm interested in data. I'm interested in looking at when people come to me for training with my company, high intensity strength training, I have a rule that no bloods, no training. So I must know when I start with a client what the baseline is, where are we starting, how well or ill or in between this person is. And if we take health on a horizontal axis like this, and we have, if you're healthy here, the next stage up, if we go right to the end and we have unhealthy here, a doctor, and this area is in between. This is where you're moving from. This is the sort of gray zone, if you like, where you're moving from healthy to unhealthy. And doctors, you don't really get to see a doctor. And a doctor isn't really interested in your health until something goes wrong. They're only trained to treat disease. Okay, but unless they've done a separate course on nutrition or something like that, none of the modern day doctors are dealing with health or prevention. This is the area of prevention. Okay? And this is the area that I'm interested in as a so-called interventional inflammologist. This is the area I want to get people before they move into this region. Because if you move into this region to the doctors, where the doctor starts seeing you, where you've already become diabetic, you've already got cardiovascular disease, etc., it's probably too late to even get back to here. Okay? So this is the area I'm interested in. This is a gray area where doctors, they don't have the time because they're so busy dealing with the sick. They probably don't have the detailed knowledge to understand how you go from healthy to prevention in this preventative area before you become sick. So things such as if we're talking about like cardiovascular disease and cancer. Cardiovascular disease and cancer in the United States are falling. Okay, believe it or not, they're falling, those rates, and they've been coming down steadily over the years. But we have to ask ourselves, why are they coming down steadily? Because obesity is going up in the United States and around the world. So what does that tell us? Oh, and the other thing is that for the first time ever in the last couple of years, lifespans have also started to fall. So what does that tell us? That tells us that people are taking the pills, they're probably taking the statins to chase a metric that the doctors are giving to allow you to live your life, but your life is becoming shorter and your health span is starting to deteriorate. Okay, does everybody understand what I mean by health span?
I mean, you mean the overall measure of health. I mean, how good we feel at a particular time.
Yeah, because if you take me, for example, I'm 54, but if I went to a doctor today, he would put me on a statin because my cholesterol is around 7.8 millimoles per liter. So the doctor would just, all he's interested in is giving me a statin to cover his backside in case I have a heart attack. And he's just chasing one metric. And these drugs, such as statins and insulin that we give to diabetics, yes, they're keeping you alive. And they're bringing the statistics down for the cancer, and they're bringing the statistics down for CVD. But they're not improving health spans. People are ending up in wheelchairs. People can't walk. People can't even stand up and get out of their seats properly. And so they're staying alive, but they're not having a quality of life. And that's what we're seeing right now. And this is the area I'm interested in, because there is very little research in this area. There's very little knowledge with regard to reversing, for example, diabetes and insulin resistance, and something I call inflammatory hysteresis, which we'll come on to. So this is the area I'm very much interested in. These people here, the healthy, they don't really need any help because, you know, they already understand how to live a healthy life. They will probably never see a doctor for anything serious, and I'm not really that interested in these people. I'm not interested in these people because these people are so unhealthy that is beyond what I can do as an interventional inflammologist. It's already in the doctor's regime, this. They need professional care. They probably do need a statin because it's the only thing that's going to keep them alive. They probably need surgery and all that sort of thing. This is the area I'm interested in. This is the area where millions and millions of us are already, and we don't know it because we're already insulin resistant and we already have something called inflammatory hysteresis. And this is where I operate.
I just wanted to bring this in. So the book that you brought, I just checked my ebook collection and I happen to have that book. So if anybody wants that book, just write your email address down there and I'll send it across to you. Okay?
Yeah,
just wanted to get that in. Yeah. So,
okay. So this is the area I'm interested in. And we're seeing now, what is really interesting is because of this coronavirus thing, has really, really shaken the world up in many, many ways. And it is becoming now very clear the type of person that gets sick from coronavirus. Many are already here. So many of the coronavirus victims are already unhealthy. They already have one of those 5 diseases of civilization that I've already talked about, but many, many millions more are in here. They're overweight. So I'm talking about the overweight here as well. So overweight, maybe even obese, are in this category. But they're not yet obese. Their blood sugars, their long-term blood sugar, HbA1c, hasn't gone up yet to the point where a doctor is interested. But they're already insulin resistant. And we're seeing that now all around the world with COVID-19, that people who have high inflammation in this zone, with the inflammatory markers of insulin, LDL, triglycerides, and all that good stuff, which we'll come on to, that they are succumbing to this. If you're healthy and you have low inflammation, you have very little to fear from coronavirus. And that's what's now becoming clear. And we are seeing that people who have damaged endotheliums, which is the lining of your blood vessels, who are insulin resistant but not necessarily diabetic, they're also succumbing to these things, to coronavirus. We're seeing that people with inflammation are being affected, are having the ACE2 angiotensin conversion enzyme is being suppressed because of inflammation. The ACE2 receptor is being suppressed, which increases oxidative stress, causes havoc with homeostasis, and allows the coronavirus a backdoor to kill you. So it's now more important than ever with the coronavirus and other viruses undoubtedly on their way in the future, that you are not in this zone. Certainly not in this zone. You shouldn't even be in this zone. You need to be in this zone. If you're in this zone, you've got really nothing to fear from coronavirus at all. Okay. So this is the preventative area that I'm very much interested in. And this is where I collect data from not only my clients, but people now through my blog are sending me data about their markers, because like I said, doctors aren't interested when you're here, and they're not, doctors aren't interested when you're here and here. They're only interested when you're here. They're only interested when things are going wrong. In this zone, I'm trying to determine when and how things are going wrong and how we can get you back to here before you even get to here. And that's what I do with my work, okay? Any questions on that?
No, I think we can move on to what is it that you do more or less with your clients? How do you measure?
Yeah, well, we'll talk about nutrition now. There's two things. There are two key elements really to inflammation for managing inflammation. Okay, if you want to manage your inflammation, there is nutrition. Can't even spell.
That's okay. I think we'll all get it.
Nutrition and exercise, okay? I don't know. I think I said exercise. The exercise that I do is high intensity strength training, okay? And there's good reason why I do that. It's the best strength training it's the best training you can do to affect and influence your insulin sensitivity and hence your inflammation. I don't intend to talk too much about this today because that would be another hour or two. Okay?
Yeah.
But I will discuss it a little bit because the two go together. But exercise and nutrition are the two things, and the most important one, without doubt, is nutrition. Because if you have crap nutrition, no amount of exercise is going to affect inflammation at all. Okay. So how do you know you are on a low inflammation diet? Or how do you know you're in a state of low inflammation? This is the $64 million question. And I, as I said, I don't like to focus on one particular macro because I found that people have different. The big evil thing right now is always carbohydrates, and yes, they are bad, but they're not bad for everyone at all times. They're certainly bad for people who are diabetics. They're certainly bad for people who have high insulin resistance, but if you don't have too much insulin resistance, you can get away with a fair bit of carbs, but there are other things you probably can't get away with. And so I prefer to think of things in terms of inflammation. And when I talk about inflammation, I try to think of it as a food pyramid, but in terms of inflammation instead of macros. And for me, I found that dairy was the big thing. Dairy had a much bigger effect on me than carbohydrates did. And as I said earlier, as you showed on that graph, dairy was a big thing. It just was the thing that allowed ketones to start to rise again.
But it's important
to come off. So it wasn't until I dropped my dairy.
It's important to say this right now that there are different kind of dairies. There are some dairies. Because there'll be a
there
lot
are different kinds of dairies, and I will ask this at the end. If anybody wants to discuss dairy at the end, we'll discuss it. I don't want to spend too much time on dairy right now, but we can do that at the end.
Yes.
And then for me, it was carbs were the second thing. Okay, I'm talking by equal amounts of weight. So I'm talking about 1 gram, 1 gram, 1 gram. And then seed oils. Seed oils had much less of effect than dairy. I could get away with seed oils for several weeks without seeing any real gain in weight, but they did block weight loss. They're definitely a problem, but if you're really, really sensitive to dairy, this is going to be a bigger problem than seed oils. Although seed oils over the long term, if you're using seed oils in your cooking every day and you're using high omega-6 every day, these are going to be a problem over the long term, no doubt. And then in here is anything else. I mean, people have sensitivities to all kinds of things. People are sensitive. I know people with nut allergies. I know people with tomato allergies, and they're life-threatening. So, you know, they can't even take 1 gram of these things. So you can potentially be sensitive to anything.
So just one thing, I think there's one question. There's been a question about GMO, about fertilizers, about pesticides. So where does that fit in the chemical stuff that is put in our food? Where does that fit in your pyramid?
Well, that is an excellent question. I don't know, and I don't think anybody knows. But you mentioned Nicholas Nassim Taleb. You know he has an ongoing fight with the GMO people and people like Monsanto.
Well, he won the case. He won the case against.
Yes, he did, and good for him. I don't know what the direct effects are of GMOs in our system, but I'm willing to bet it's not going to be very good. If we're disturbing nature, if we're disturbing the ecosystem and we think we can make something better than Mother Nature can, and we start ingesting it, I think we're opening a huge Pandora's box. So I don't touch anything that's processed. The only thing, if you want to call it processed, is a little bit of coconut oil or something like that. But my diet is free of all additives, free of anything processed that comes in a jar or with a label on it. Okay, I
just want to bring this in. So I'm from this area of India called Punjab, and Punjab is famous for being a very agricultural state, and where we utilized a lot of fertilizers and a lot of GMO crops and all that. And
yeah,
guys, so the thing is that cancer is so common in Punjab. Unfortunately, my father has it, but cancer is so common that actually there is a train that goes from one place to a famous cancer hospital in Sangrur that is actually called the cancer state. That is how that is. And I mean, how did cancer suddenly become so prominent? Because it's only
exactly, and it's funny you should say that, Fateh, because cancer here, even though cancer, as I said, the cancers. If we look at United States figures, cancer rates are falling. Don't ask me why, I don't know why. But cancer rates here in Finland are absolutely skyrocketing. I tweeted the other day, Helsinki Sanomat is a main national newspaper here, and they had a weekend supplement. And in that supplement, they published a graph for the cancer statistics for Finland, and it was vertical. It was scary. Since the 70s, it's vertical. And, you know, we can speculate what's causing that, but it's got to be a large part to do with this. And we don't know, we don't fully understand what's happening with GMOs. It's something we shouldn't be doing. We shouldn't be eating those sort of things. We shouldn't even be putting them in the environment because we don't know what's going to happen there. The other thing that concerns me is microplastics, because if that gets into the food chain, then, you know, that is really scary because we just don't know what's going to happen. If microplastics get into the central nervous system, for example. So, anyway, yeah, it's a good question.
Nick, there's already some questions about dairy, as I predicted, because, yeah, you know, the subconscious.
Always dairy. Always
Always dairy, yes. So,
yeah, go on.
So I mean, people are just interested in asking why is it, how is it that dairy really fits into that pyramid, and what kind of dairy, what is safe to eat, what isn't safe to eat?
Okay, well, since everybody's asking about dairy, let's quickly talk about it. I can talk at the end. There's two kinds of dairy, A1 casein and A2 casein, okay? I actually drank whey. There's two proteins in dairy, whey and casein. Those are the two main proteins. There's also lactose. You can be lactose intolerant, okay? So lactose is a sugar. So we have three things, really. You can be intolerant to this depending on how quickly you've gone on to dairy as a kid and various other things like that. You can have lactose intolerance, which can be a factor, but it's basically a sugar, and there's not a lot of it in dairy. I think it's about 5% maximum in milk, for example. So you can have a problem here, but what I don't know why dairy is a problem, but I have suggested that it's one of these two. It's A1 or A2 casein, and the reason for that is because casein, when it's ingested, is converted to casomorphin. It becomes a morphine in your gut, and people are suggesting this is why people are addicted to cheese, very strong cheese, because it has an addictive effect due to casomorphin.
So
okay, which is going to push your insulin up.
So there's a particular kind of dairy that. So you mentioned A2. A2 casein is the problem.
I don't know which one. I don't know, but I know people who can eat dairy here, go to Italy on holiday, and have no problem because they have a different dairy there. But what I do know for me is that when I go to sheep and goat's cheese, no problem. And the reason for that, I believe, is because sheep and goat's cheese is much more closer to human milk than cow. So people, if you're struggling and you're finding that dairy is a problem, try sheep's or goat's cheese.
Yeah. So
even the milk.
Ayurveda really recommends goat milk and goat meat in particular. Goat cheese, goat milk. That's what Ayurveda recommends a lot.
Okay. So I'm going to talk now about ketones, all right? All right, so how do you know when you are in ketosis or not? Well, the first thing you need to do, you said that there's a problem in India getting hold of these things.
Yes. It's not very easily available. Yes.
Well, that's a shame because this is the best way of telling. This is a combined blood glucose and ketone meter. Does everybody know what that is? Has everybody seen those?
Everybody knows what a blood glucose meter is, for sure.
Yeah. This one will do not only blood glucose, but it'll do ketones as well.
Yes.
Okay, and you do it with some strips. You take a finger prick, and you present it to the machine, and the machine just measures it for you. You really need one of these when you're starting out because it helps you to understand this, that when you start to lose weight, ketones start to go up. You start to burn fat through ketosis. I'm not going to explain ketosis. I'm assuming everybody understands what ketosis is. If you don't, you can look it up. And as we go from about 0.5 up to around 5, and then we drop down here to about 10. This 0.5 is where nutritional ketosis starts, okay? It's very, very small, but when I started to lose my weight, ketones shot up to 5. And I was losing 2 kilograms a week. So everything is cool. You know when you're starting to lose your weight, the ketones are up and weight is coming down, you know that you must have low inflammation because your insulin is down, you're burning the weight, you're achieving a state of low inflammation. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. If you go to 10 or beyond, you go into ketoacidosis. Some people worry about ketoacidosis, but you don't have to worry about it if you're not a type 1 diabetic. Ketoacidosis is a problem if you can't produce any insulin to keep ketones in check. So don't be worried about ketoacidosis if you're not a type 1 diabetic. I had very high ketones when I had weight loss of about 6.5, but I was losing weight a lot. Keep your salt and salt water up when you're drinking, so you don't feel dizzy, because you lose a lot of water, you lose a lot of salt when you're losing weight. So this is how this is how I found out this. By playing around and restricting and writing everything down. You have to be meticulous. And this is how I found out that dairy had a big effect, because when I was eating dairy, ketones just didn't go anywhere. They were zero. Okay? It wasn't until I dropped the carbs and the dairy that ketones shot up. I dropped the seed oils much later. I didn't drop the seed oils until about 2014. I didn't know about them then, but they didn't have a major effect. These two had a much greater effect. But seed oils over the long term can have a very great effect, because they will get into your cells. They will start to affect the cell membrane. So these are to be taken seriously, but for immediate weight loss, these two, for me, were the most important. And you can get that through measuring your ketones. Does that make sense? Hello? 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 Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, does that make sense?
Yes, it makes sense.
Okay, good. Right, so that's that. So that's when I started my company. Is it okay if I wipe this?
Yes, go ahead.
So when I started my company, ultimatefitness.fi, I started it with a view to reducing inflammation. Through HIIT, high intensity strength training, and nutrition. And as a baseline, I need to know when somebody comes to me, it's no good me training somebody. Let me just rewind. When I started the company, I didn't do any biometrics at all. I didn't measure anything in clients. I didn't measure any bloods or anything. And I noticed that some clients were doing better than others. Okay, and I couldn't understand why. I couldn't understand why some clients were developing really well and really quickly, and other clients weren't, both in their weight loss and in the gym. Okay, their strength wasn't going up, or it was going up very slowly compared to others. And it was then that I started measuring certain biometrics, all right, because I wanted to get to the bottom of this. And I started reading up, and I found out about insulin resistance. And the thing with insulin resistance is this. I found out through my own research, not through reading anything, is that you can have normal HbA1c. But you can still be insulin resistant. And that was, hello?
Yeah, I'm here, Nick.
Okay, I can hear somebody talking. I thought you were talking. Okay, so you can have normal HbA1c, but you can still be insulin resistant. As soon as I started measuring client bloods, and I'll come on to what we measure shortly, I found out that you can have this and still be normal HbA1c and still be insulin resistant. This was a real shock to me. And then I started putting two and two together, that the people who were slightly insulin resistant were the ones who were struggling in the gym. They were the ones who were getting results but slower than the rest, and sometimes their performance dropped and sometimes it went up. There wasn't consistency. And so I wanted to look into this, and I started to look into something called HOMA-IR. HOMA-IR is your homeostatic model assessment for insulin resistance. It's how insulin resistant you are. And to put it very, very simply, if this is blood glucose, this is your fasting, and this is your insulin. So if in the morning, first thing, you're measuring blood glucose and you can measure insulin, which you can't do at home at the moment because there is a couple of consumer products allow you to do that, but you usually have to go to a lab to do this. If you have normal blood glucose and you have low insulin compared to that, you have no insulin resistance. Very simply, I mean, the model is a little bit more complicated than this, but the calculation is very simple. Okay? If you have normal blood sugar, blood glucose, but your insulin is slightly higher, okay, you are already becoming insulin resistant. Not diabetic, but insulin resistant. If your fasting blood sugar is normal, but I think you can guess what's coming next, your insulin is something like this, you are diabetic. Okay, and the problem is the doctors aren't doing this routinely. They're only interested in this. And if you remember my healthy and my unhealthy line before, this HbA1c, they only look at this, they only do something about this when it pops up to the diabetic level, which is around 6 millimole, 6%. Okay? So they don't, if you've got a normal fasting blood sugar, which my insulin resistant clients all do, normal HbA1c, then doctors aren't interested. But I started doing HOMA-IR. I started doing this test. And I found out that a lot of my clients were insulin resistant. I haven't had a diabetic yet, but I'm sure it won't be long. But they were insulin resistant despite having a normal HbA1c. And that was a big shock to me. And that was when I just started taking it very seriously, not only the training for my clients, but also measuring their bloods as we go along. Okay? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm starting to gather data about this, or I have been gathering data for 3 years now, about what kind of people are insulin resistant, normal blood sugar, and are struggling in the gym to address their insulin resistance and why that is happening. That's everything that I do really is this interventional inflammology, that middle of the graph, if you remember, where you are between unhealthy and healthy. This is where people are. This is the root of all of those 5 diseases of civilization, is when we start getting into this region, when it's all too late. Any questions at this point before I go on to craft?
No, let's move ahead.
Okay, so the picture for HOMA-IR isn't that simple. HOMA-IR is just a static snapshot that you do of fasting. Something that's a little bit better than that is Kraft. Has everybody heard of Joseph Kraft? Dr. Joseph Kraft? Okay, this is a great book. This tells you about the Kraft test. And the Kraft test, what the Kraft test does, what the HOM-IR doesn't, is it looks at over time as a dynamic response. Okay, so what we do is we look at insulin, and we look in particular at insulin, but we also look at blood sugar. But let's talk about insulin, and we talk about time. That's 1 to 5 hours, okay? And what Kraft discovered was the insulin response for standard blood sugar, a glucose drink, a standardized glucose drink that you take at time 0, and he measured insulin every hour. Okay? And he plotted the response of insulin. And he found that different people had different responses at different times. Some people would go up here and come down here. Some people would go up here, down here. And there were 5 different patterns. Okay? And it's only pattern 1 that is normal. Every other pattern, 2 to 5, is abnormal and means you have diabetes. But you can have normal fasting blood sugar. And this is the next phase of my research, is I want to start doing Kraft, because Kraft gives you more detail than HOM-IR. HOM-IR is calculated, very simple calculation. It's fasting insulin times fasting glucose divided by 22.5. Very simply, there are online calculators that do this for you, but that's how you do it. Okay? To get your HOM-IR. That's your static snapshot here. And if you remember when I drew those little bars of normal blood sugar, normal insulin, slightly lower insulin, and then we have insulin resistant, and then we have diabetes on HOM-IR. So we have normal, IR, diabetes for HOM-IR, okay? That's HOM-IR. This is Kraft, this is HOM-IR. This is static, this is dynamic. And the normal HOM-IR that people accept as normal is 1.0. Anything above 1.0, say 1.0 to just under 3, about 2.8, is insulin resistant. Anything above 3 for HOM-IR is diabetes. The problem that I'm seeing with my clients is even people with HOM-IR of 1 or just above 1 struggle to lose weight and waist. And one of the metrics I'm interested in, very interested in, is a great marker for inflammation, is your waist height ratio, which is better than BMI.
There's a question: how many hours of fasting do we after how many hours of fasting do we measure fasting insulin?
It has to be a minimum. If you do the HOM-IR, it's standard blood testing. These are fasting, so these need to be at least 10 hours. 10 hours with nothing to eat. Okay? Now, what I'm finding is that people from my blood tests that I'm seeing my clients, from blood tests that people are slowly sending me, is that HOMIR 1.0, people are struggling with waist over height less than 0.5. Do you understand why this is important? That why this is better than BMI? Hello? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Hello?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can now.
All good, all good.
Okay.
I just turn my mic off and it just takes a few seconds for the mic to turn back on, so you don't need to worry. I'll tell you if
Okay, I'm just asking, does everybody understand why waist over height is better than BMI?
Yes, I think we do. Wait, can you just explain again? There's somebody has mentioned.
Well, BMI, body mass index, equals your weight in kilograms divided by your height squared in meters. Okay, and the traditional, overweight, I think overweight equals greater than 25, obese equals greater than 30 on body mass index. The problem with body mass index is that it breaks down when you talk about people like Arnold Schwarzenegger, because Arnold Schwarzenegger, big guy, very heavy, but his waist was really slim and he had no fat. But technically he was obese. So that is just wrong. It's just completely wrong. It's best to look at this ratio, and this is the waist circumference around your navel without breathing in. Okay? Your waist circumference divided by your height. If it's greater than 0.5, you're carrying extra weight around the waist. And I'm seeing in my data that people who are struggling with this are also struggling with this. Okay? And I'm seeing that 1.0 doesn't necessarily mean on HOMIR that you don't have insulin resistance. And the next step is I want to take people who have this and have got problems with weight. I need to do a craft with them. But this craft is dynamic and it takes 5 hours. This is 1 hour and this is 5 hours. And you need to be measuring insulin every hour on the hour. So you can't do that at home yet. That's the problem. And all the work that Dr. Kraft did showed that there are lots and lots of insulin-resistant people with normal blood sugar on HOMIR. And it's a huge problem. And I'm seeing that in the gym, that people who are struggling around this point here are probably got a craft 2 to 5 response on here. But I don't know until we can do craft. And we can't do craft without a lab. That's the only problem. You can't do it at home. This is a simple blood test that you can do. Okay? And so insulin resistance is the hidden thing, and it is behind insulin resistance comes all the problems, inflammatory problems like your endothelium. If you have high insulin, your blood vessels are inflamed because of the insulin. The endothelium, the lining of the blood vessels becomes inflamed. They then start to, you start to get damage to the blood vessels, and that's where the lipids start to embed. The LDL starts to embed and starts to calcify. So if you could have, in theory, you could have high LDL, but if you have a low inflammation and your insulin is low, you probably don't have any damage to the endothelium and you're not going to get calcification. Although I don't think you can have one without the other. Okay? And this is all hypothesis. That we can talk about lipids in a minute, but the lipids hypothesis is all hypothesis. But I believe that you can't have calcification without insulin resistance, and you must have higher insulin to damage the blood vessels or the endothelium, and then you must have the higher LDL, which goes up, and the triglycerides go up, with this increasing insulin resistance to cause the damage in the first place. But you must have this inflammatory background for cardiovascular disease. Okay? Do you understand that before I talk about the other markers that I track?
Asking how do we derive the waist height ratio? So basically, the waist you have to measure when you hold your breath around your abdomen.
No, you don't hold your breath. You must not hold your breath. you must not hold your breath. You measure around here, around your navel, relaxed. Not around your hips, around your navel, your belly button.
Right. And so just a question, what are the units that we are using? So, I mean,
it doesn't matter. It's a ratio. So you can use inches as long as you use the same. It's a ratio.
Right. Perfect. Yeah. Perfect. Great. Yeah.
Anyone. Yeah. I use centimeters, obviously. And I'm about 0.43. It took me a long time to get below 0.5 when I started my weight loss journey. And I think the biggest reason for that is because I didn't drop industrial seed oils until much later. I dropped the dairy, I dropped the carbs, and the weight wouldn't come down below this until I dropped the seed oils. I didn't know that the seed oils were so significant. So that's what I'm saying about the long-term effects of seed oils, the inflammatory effects. Okay?
Yep.
So that's that. If you want to take a screenshot of that, feel free. I'm about to wipe it. In fact, maybe not. I'll just draw in the corner here.
Okay, so there's a question about HDL and LDL relation to HOMA.
Yeah, okay.
And there's another question.
I'll talk about the markers in a minute. I haven't forgotten. I'm going to talk about all the markers in a minute.
Sure.
But so remind me if I forget. So does everybody understand the difference between Kraft and HOMA-IR? And the HOMA-IR, this is important. I don't believe that HOMA-IR of 1.0 is good enough. I believe that in an evolutionary sense, we should be closer to 0.5. I'm seeing people, young people, I'm getting blood tests. Some of my clients are sending me blood tests of their children, and their children are 0.5 because they haven't yet been exposed to a crap lifestyle. So I don't believe 1.0 is good enough. I think you need to be below 1.0 for HOMA-IR and closer to 0.5. Okay? And just because your HOMA-IR is 1.0 doesn't mean that you're not resistant dynamically according to Kraft. Remember, anything above Kraft is 1 to 5. So Kraft 1 to 5. 1 is normal. 5 is diabetic type 1. If you are anything above 1, this line or this or whatever, you are technically diabetic. You are type 2 diabetic, even though you have normal fasting glucose. And these are the hidden insulin-resistant people we just don't know about. We don't see it in society because we're not measuring it, but there are millions and millions of people going around insulin-resistant, and they don't know it. And this is the root of all disease. So it's my job to try and reverse this and get them closer to this 0.5 on HOMA-IR. Okay? Through nutrition and exercise. That's what I'm trying to do. And I need the data. We can talk about the data later. Okay?
So, can we address a few questions now, or is there something else you want to
go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
So I think the first question we can do is...
There's a lot of knocking. Somebody's knocking on the line.
Yeah.
Hello?
Okay, talk.
Yeah, it's just I can hear background knocking, but I don't know what that is. It's something on your end. Go and ask a question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just go ahead, continue with your session, and we'll just get to the questions in a few minutes.
Okay. Right. So that's how my arm craft. So what I'm going to introduce now is the concept of inflammatory hysteresis, okay? It's not difficult.
Just get to the question. So the first question
is... ask questions while I'm doing this.
So waist to height ratio, what is the relationship with that and HOMA-IR? Is there a relationship there? Waist height ratio?
Relationship between waist height ratio and what?
HOMA-IR.
Yes. I am seeing, like I said, I'm seeing that people who struggle to get below 0.5 are also struggling to get below 1.0 on HOMA-IR.
Right.
So I mean, it's not a definite correlation, but there's definitely something there. And other studies are showing that if you've got a HOMA-IR greater than 1.0, you're also going to struggle with getting below 0.5 on waist, except for skinny diabetics, and we'll talk about that later. So remind me about skinny diabetics.
Yes. So another question is, does the age come into factor? Especially, how do we factor in age about the waist height ratio specifically and generally for all of these tests?
There's no factor for age. If you've got at any age, if you've got fat around here at any age, doesn't matter whether you're young or old, you're probably going to be insulin resistant.
Okay, so that's that. Then the third thing is, there's a question about when do we worry about going to craft from HOMA-IR? So I think...
Okay, that's a great question. Can you save that until the end? That's a great question. Just can you write that down, and we'll come to that at the end.
Yes, perfect. We'll
that's a great question.
And the final question is, another question is the relationship between HDL, LDL, and HOMA-IR.
Yeah, coming on to that.
Okay, perfect.
Remind me of that. I just want to quickly explain this.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have now high inflammation, low inflammation diet type, okay? I'm not going to argue about this right now. I'm going to put the diets in here, what I think they are for a high and low inflammation diet. But the hysteresis model goes like this. If you start here on a diet at point A, and it's, sorry, I've got this the wrong way around. High inflammation, low inflammation. If you start at point A on a high inflammation diet and you stay there for years and years, your systemic inflammation will go up according to the markers which we're going to talk about in a minute. And you're going to end up at B. From A to B on a high inflammation diet, your systemic inflammation is going to go up according to all the markers we're going to talk about. If you then decide to make a change and you want to lose weight, you're going to go to a low inflammation diet. You're going to come somewhere here, point C, and you're going to come down the curve like this. Okay? but you've still got some inflammation. You've still got a systemic level of inflammation. Here, it's not really where you want to be. You want to be down here. You can't have zero systemic inflammation, because if you did, you'd be dead. So what you're trying to do is come down further to somewhere around here, point D.
So is any of what you mentioned sex specific?
Say again?
Is it sex specific? Any of what you mentioned?
No, not at all. Not at all. Waist height is common. Women and men gather weight around the waist. Okay, some women may gather around the butt, but everybody who is in danger, this is the danger zone. If you have weight around your waist, you have visceral fat here. Fat on your butt or on your thighs doesn't matter as much as fat here, because if you have fat here, you got fat on your heart. Make sense? So, if you make a change in your diet, go from A to B and you come to C, you're trying to get to D, and what I'm seeing here is that people get stuck at C. Some people, the lucky people, can come straight down here, and they don't have any what I call hysteresis. The people who get stuck here at C, they have inflammatory hysteresis. And this is a story on my blog. I don't know if you want to show that. Client A, her story is typical. Woman in her 50s, been all her life eating crap, ends up at B, comes to see me. Weight comes down, exercise helps, but she gets stuck at HOM-IR. We did her HOM-IR over a course of nearly 2 years. When she came to me, her HOM-IR was nearly 2.8. So she was very insulin resistant, but she had normal blood sugar, absolutely normal blood sugar. So doctors weren't interested in her, but she was obese. You can see the pictures on my blog. She was completely obese. She had normal blood sugar. But she had very high fasting insulin, and her HOM-IR was very high, virtually diabetic. We got her down to here, but it took 18 months to get her down to here, where HOM-IR was finally broken less than 1. Okay? HOM-IR. So this point here, less than 1.0, okay? And as I say, I question 1.0. I think it should be closer to 0.5. And this is the hysteresis effect I talked about. Okay, so the lucky people, if you're young and you haven't been on a high inflammation diet for too long, if you're lucky, you can go from B to D. And no problem, you're there if you catch it early. But if you're in your 50s, 40s, 50s, older, going from B to D is very difficult. Going from B to C first is pretty cool. You can do that. But that took 18 months, 12 months just to go from B to C with this woman. HOM-IR gradually coming down. Triglycerides coming down. Okay. LDL improving. HDL going up. Okay. But it wasn't, the final bit took about 6 months to get from here to here, with the total taking nearly 2 years to reverse this phenomenon that I call inflammatory hysteresis. So when I see doctors on social media saying, "Oh, I've reduced my client's HbA1c or blood sugar," they're not even checking the insulin. They're not even checking that. They're not even checking HOM-IR. So they say, "Oh, great, I've reduced my patient's HbA1c from 12 down to 8. Okay, great, you've reduced the blood sugar, but what have you done with the insulin?" You know, it takes a long time for the insulin to come down and affect HOM-IR and get it back down. And I don't know what it's doing to Kraft, but I bet you Kraft is showing an even worse picture. That's my point. And that was the question that somebody asked. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So the integral, if we're going to get technical, of insulin resistance is inflammatory hysteresis. And that's a great quote. That was from one of my followers on Twitter. Okay, so for the mathematicians who are following this, if this is f of x and this is g of x function, then your inflammatory load that you've experienced over the years is the area under this curve minus the area under this curve. So it's quite literally integral from b to c. If we could measure this as a function, this is just theoretical. B to c f of x dx minus integral a to d g of x dx. Okay, that's your inflammatory load that you've experienced over all these years, 20 plus years. So your inflammatory load, if you're able to come down this curve, is much less than the inflammatory load if you've come down here. And this can be applied at any point in the curve. You can start here, intermediate, wherever, okay? This is a lot of theory, but the point here is this part here from C to D is the inflammatory hysteresis. This is the hysteresis effect where you can't undo. This is like frying an egg. It's very difficult to unfry an egg. You can't, it's impossible almost sometimes. And there are some people, my argument is that some people have inherited inflammatory hysteresis, where both parents have been, say, insulin resistant, and they've had a child, and their offspring is born insulin resistant. Okay, and that's obviously very sad because they're permanently stuck at C. Even if they go onto a low inflammation diet, they're going to struggle losing weight for the rest of their lives, for all their lives. And if you look at my blog, I published some research, or not my own research, but I refer to some studies that were done in Sweden and in Holland after the war when they had famines. And those famines showed over the course of generations that there was a knock-on effect that parents who had experienced feast or famine, and the switching between the two in particular, which happens in India as well. Happens in India, we get feast and famine, and people who have feast and famine then have children, and that is they have a knock-on effect with their children. They pass on this inflammatory hysteresis that I talk about, and they're born that way, and it's very difficult for them. And going back to the earlier question about waste and stuff, there are, of course, thin on the outside, fat on the inside, and there are people in India, especially in India, where there are seasons of drought and seasons of famine. We have skinny people in places like India who are very insulin resistant because of feast or famine and this inflammatory hysteresis effect. So in their case, waist over height ratio doesn't tell you much, but inflammatory index does tell you. And the inflammatory index, which I talked about with Pater, is quite simply inflammatory index equals your HOMA-IR score times your waist height ratio, and that should be less than 0.5. Should be less than 0.5. Yeah, 0.5, because ideally your waist height needs to be 0.5, HOMA-IR 1. So it needs to be less than 0.5, and that's how you cover the case of the skinny diabetic.
So,
okay.
Where does fasting fit in? Is fasting?
Yeah, this is a good point. Okay, so there's 4 ways to reverse inflammatory hysteresis. Okay, so going from C to D, how do you do that? How do you do that? This is the tricky thing. There's staying on an ultra low inflammation diet. So reversal, if I write it up here, reversal IH, can you see this? One, ultra low inflammation diet. You have to, if you have hysteresis, you can't mess about. You can't change your diet. You are very sensitive to carbohydrates. You're probably very sensitive to dairy or something like that. You have to really stay strict. So you have to be on a, what I call ultra low inflammation diet. The second thing, if that doesn't work, you could try intermittent fasting. The third thing, and we can talk about a little bit about exercise now, but the best exercise is high intensity strength training, because that is the best way to increase your insulin sensitivity. I'm happy to talk about exercise today, but I think we need to leave that for another session, because I've got a whole another hour that I can talk about HIIT and why it's so good for better than, say, cardio, what people call cardio, because this is much better for insulin resistance. And the fourth thing is metformin. And metformin works if, I wouldn't advocate anybody going on metformin if the first three don't, unless the first three don't work. So metformin here can help drive this down. The trouble with metformin is it has mitochondrial toxicity. Does everybody understand mitochondria?
Yes.
Mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell.
Yes.
And metformin is slightly toxic to mitochondria, which affects your strength training. So there is no perfect drug. Okay, all drugs have side effects, but I think there's a good case for cycling metformin. So if you are struggling to get from C to D and you've tried all these three, try doing 3 months of metformin, some strength training, and come off metformin, and try strength training again, and then go back if you need to. But I don't advocate taking metformin. I don't advocate taking any drugs, and I certainly don't advocate it taking just because some people, metformin is kind of becoming trendy because people think it's a longevity drug. Well, all drugs have side effects, and one of the ones is mitochondrial toxicity. And so I would only use or advocate metformin, which is a prescription drug anyway, so you have to go to your doctor to get it. I would only advocate that if and when you can't go from C to D and you're struggling when you've done all three, the previous three. Okay? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Makes sense. I think we are losing, even though there are many people who are still probably wishing that this could go on for longer, but we're losing a lot of people. So we could probably wrap this up in another 10-15 minutes, and then we can move on to we can organize another section later.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's that. I'll just talk about the markers now. So this is all data that I'm seeing. I'm not making this up. This is all data I'm getting from my clients, from my training. This is stuff I'm seeing for real. Okay, and other data that people are not on my clients who are sending me data, either friends of friends or through the blog on the forum. Okay, so this is real stuff. So markers. The basic markers, inflammatory markers. And you have a form, you're going to try and collect some of these, right?
Yeah, I have a form which I just shared.
I mean, inflammation, we can talk about, like I said, cytokines, myokines, we can talk about interleukin 6, we can talk about CRP, all those. You can have a huge, you can get labs, you can get a whole load of labs done, but what we want to do is focus on some markers that are almost certainly going to move when the rest move. And the markers that I choose are the basic ones that everybody should be able to get, and they are total cholesterol, LDL, HDL, triglycerides, fasting blood glucose, HbA1c, long-term blood sugar, CRP, fasting insulin. As well as, of course, waist and height and weight. I'm not really interested in weight only as not what the value is, but I'm interested in whether it's going up or down in relation to these, because if waist height ratio is going down and weight is going down, that's okay. If waist height ratio is going down and weight is going up, that's also okay, because that means you're building muscle. But if waist and height is going up and weight is going up, that means you're building fat. So I'm not interested in this. I'm only interested in it as a trend. So does everybody understand total cholesterol, LDL, HDL, triglycerides? Total cholesterol is the sum of these three, roughly. LDL plus HDL plus a fraction of triglycerides. Okay?
Yeah.
Does everybody understand what LDL and HDL and triglycerides are? Do I need to talk about that?
I think so. They're very, very common blood marker tests.
Okay. So the only thing, the hypothesis of cholesterol, nobody really knows about the lipid hypothesis. No, it's a hypothesis. It's remained a hypothesis. And if you ask 10 doctors, you're going to get 10 different answers about what causes cardiovascular disease. But what I'm seeing with my data is that total cholesterol, if you go onto a low inflammation diet, total cholesterol goes up, LDL goes down, and HDL goes up, and triglycerides go down. Okay? And the most important ratio of these is your trig HDL, because that tells you the portion of LDL, the solid little tiny dense globules that are responsible for cardiovascular disease. That tells you how much of that you have in your bloodstream. Total cholesterol is almost meaningless. It's this that matters. And I'm seeing that when you go on a sort of low inflammation diet, total cholesterol does go up, but LDL and triglycerides critically come down. And this ratio. Sorry, I've got this HDL.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Nick, you can also talk about CRP a little. It's CRP.
Sorry?
You can also talk about CRP a little. It's not very clear. CRP. Yes.
Okay, CRP is an inflammation, C-reactive protein. It's produced by the liver. It's a reaction to disease and background inflammation. So CRP is important. Again, there's debate about, in a normal healthy person, CRP, it should be about 1, less than 1.0 in grams. I think it's in grams. So grams per deciliter or whatever it is. But CRP is, in my opinion, and it's just my opinion, is not as important as these, because CRP doesn't, what I've seen over the years, CRP doesn't react as quickly as these do. CRP will react if you've got a cold or you've got a disease. CRP can go up, it can go through the roof. CRP can be affected by your exercise. You can have slight inflammation just from exercise. So when people go to have bloods, I always tell them, try and do your bloods several days after exercising. because CRP doesn't give you a very good picture. CRP can move for all kinds of reasons. That's the point. These are more important. If you have very high CRP and these are high, then of course it's a worry. But if you have slightly high CRP, that could be you've just had a cold, you've trained. Many reasons can push CRP up. But these are the most important, plus the fasting insulin. Because when we have the fasting insulin and the fasting blood glucose, we can work out the HOMA-IR. Okay? And this is the data I've been collecting, and the things I'm seeing, like I said, from my clients, is that waist-height ratio greater than 0.5 tends to be HOMA-IR greater than 1.0. These are pretty good. This is true when you go onto an low inflammation diet. Total cholesterol, I don't think you need to worry about. The problem is that doctors are obsessed with this, and doctors are obsessed with this. If I go to a doctor, 54 now, and show him my cholesterol, he's going to put me on a statin. He'll want to put me on statins, right? Because that's all they're interested in. They're just chasing this metric. They're chasing one number to try and get this down because they think that this is all that matters. Well, it doesn't. But we can't prove that because it's only a hypothesis. But when I see that people's weight is coming down, their HOMA-IR is coming down, and their total cholesterol is going up, then, and they feel better, they're performing better, this becomes increasingly meaningless.
So the danger number here is HDL. If HDL is going up, that's when you're supposed to slightly worry about.
Yeah, that's good because if triglycerides are dropping, this ratio is dropping.
Right.
Because the HDL is the denominator.
Right.
Okay. So HDL, it doesn't matter HDL. Does everybody understand why HDL and LDL are important? LDL is coming from the liver and going to the cells, so it's full of fat, it's full of nutrients, and that's going out in your arteries. HDL is coming back from your cells, so it's depleted, it doesn't have all the dense lipids anymore. So HDL isn't the problem, LDL is the problem. But only one part of LDL is the problem, and that is measured through triglycerides HDL ratio. So I, like anybody else, like any other doctor, can't tell you what is absolutely true about cardiovascular disease. It's only a hypothesis. But what I'm seeing in my clients is that as weight and waist comes down, and as we exercise more and more, high-intensity strength training, we see fasting insulin come down, we see HOMA-IR improving as a result, we see total cholesterol going up, we see LDL come down, HDL go up, and triglycerides come down. And people feel better, people perform better. So it depends what you believe. Do you believe what the studies say, that we should be focusing on total cholesterol, or do you believe what you see with your own eyes when you're doing this every day for real in the gym and taking bloods?
Yes. So the question is a question that are we trying to make the HDL by the triglyceride by HDL low? So we are trying to make it lower, right?
Triglycerides we want to get lower, yes.
Right, and the ratio as a whole needs to be lower.
Yes, because the triglycerides divided by the HDL, so you want a low triglycerides and a high HDL.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Great.
So if we're talking in European units, the ratios are slightly different for American units, but for European units, millimoles per liter, if you start seeing triglycerides HDL going above 1 and going towards 2, then that's a problem. But you're not going to see that without insulin reacting, in my experience.
Right. Okay.
And because insulin is also reacting, this is starting to damage the endothelium, the lining of the vessels, and that damaged endothelium causes this fraction of LDL to embed, and that is the root of cardiovascular disease. That's the theory.
You've already addressed the Kraft and HOMA-IR question. Was that clear? If that wasn't clear to you, you can just ask that again. I think we had to.
Yeah, somebody asked about Kraft and HOMA-IR.
Yes. You can just go over that again.
When do we worry about going to Kraft from HOMA-IR? Yes, okay. Good question. HOMA-IR, as I said, HOMA-IR gives you a snapshot, okay? My experience from my clients suggests that if you have a HOMA-IR of 1.0 hovering around, even 0.8, 0.9 or above, you are potentially Kraft 1 or 2 or 3 on Kraft 1, 2 or Kraft 1, 2 or 3. I haven't done Kraft yet, but my argument is that people with HOMA-IR 1.0 struggle to lose the weight, and some of them struggle in the gym as well. So this suggests to me that on Kraft, they are type 2 diabetic or insulin resistant, or they have impaired glucose tolerance, what Kraft calls IGT, impaired glucose tolerance. I haven't done the Kraft yet, but Kraft is the gold standard. Kraft is the gold standard that you do when you suspect somebody, the Kraft test, when you suspect somebody has diabetes. But Kraft, Dr. Kraft, didn't just do it with diabetics. He did it with thousands and thousands of ordinary people who were not diabetic. And he found out thousands and thousands of people were insulin resistant or had impaired glucose tolerance, which was type 2 diabetes. So my argument is that if you have HOMA-IR of 1.0, great, but it's not the end of the story, especially if you are struggling to lose weight and lose weight around your waist, or you're struggling in the gym with performance on strength. But Kraft is 5 hours to do. You have to go to a doctor's surgery or a lab. You have to drink the sugar solution, and they have to stick you on an insulin clamp for 5 hours. So it's really difficult to do. And that's why it's not done routinely.
Right. I think a couple of questions before we'll wrap up. One of them is one of the questions is people are interested in knowing what your schedule is, what your diet and exercise schedule is. So that's one. The other question is, is there a relation between stiffness and joints and HOMA-IR? So I do know that arthritis is another inflammatory state.
Yes.
So if
okay, my diet is on my blog. Everything I do is on my blog. You can go there. But very briefly, I'm heavily meat based. I did 18 months of just meat and water. And if you go and look at my blog post, I published all my bloods there. And during that time, my bloods improved even better. My total cholesterol went really high, from about 5.6 to 8. But all these other markers, all these and these ratios all improved dramatically. I became extremely lean. My waist height ratio improved. My HOMA-IR improved. And everything was fantastic. I came off meat and water after 18 months simply because I feel, okay, meat and water is great, but I feel that it's not evolutionary correct just to be on meat and water. I feel that we need a little bit of something else. And so I eat some nuts, I eat some berries, not many. And I also occasionally have some dates and figs and some honey and stuff like that. So if I go for carbs, I try to go for natural carbs. But I'm very restricted with those because I believe that I have a HOMA-IR of 0.8, but I've always had very high fasting blood sugar. So I believe that if I did a Kraft, I may even be Kraft 2 or above. So I would really like to do a Kraft on myself. And as Dr. Kraft found out later on in life, he did a Kraft test, his own test on himself in his 80s, and he found out he was diabetic in his 70s, I think, or maybe even 60s. And he found out he was diabetic and he had no idea. But he says in that book that he was, eating a lot of rubbish, and found out that eventually it caught up with him. And so I believe that even me, with a HOMI of 0.8, I still have impaired glucose tolerance and I need to do a craft. So craft is the gold standard, but it's very difficult to do. And what I'm trying to do now is gather data from people all around the world through my blog and through this form that FATA has pushed out to find out how many people are actually insulin resistant according to HOMI-R, and then find out whether HOMI-R of 0.5 is closer to the truth where we should be, and then try and do some craft on that and gather this data, because people, Joseph Kraft after Joseph Kraft, there was nobody else. There is nobody else doing this out there because it's time consuming. But we can start, and we can start with doing HOMI-R and waste. We can start establishing the relationship between HOMI-R and waste and see if there's a correlation there. That would be a great start and help people to reverse the inflammatory hysteresis I've talked about, because that's a problem. You can still be insulin resistant with normal blood sugar.
So guys, I'll just briefly talk about. So one of the outcomes we are looking to this, as you know, Nick has totally given us time here. He's not. He's obviously there's been no remuneration, and we're really hoping if we can get some data, which is fairly obvious, simple blood markers that you can get in any blood test. So if you can submit any of your data, it will be completely anonymous, but it will be really helpful for Nick's research. So if you guys can do that, if you can spread that form around to other people, that will be really helpful. My goal is to try and get a lot of data for Nick over the next few months. So yes, do donate some. Do let us know your blood. You can even email us your latest copies of your blood reports by marking out your name and email other personal details. So that's one. I think the last question that we can address before we go is there anything on alcohol or beers and wines? How does that fit into?
Well, I don't drink at all. It's a personal choice. I had a big problem with alcohol. One of the reasons I was so big was because I was drinking a lot of beer and wine. And beer and wine is some of the worst things you can drink. Because they block ketosis. They're full of carbohydrates, and they're really bad. It's not so much the alcohol, but it's the other stuff. The carbs that are in wine and beer. And so I don't touch it. But if people want to drink alcohol, that's their choice. But if you're going to try and lose weight drinking beer and wine, you're going to struggle. You're going to have to severely reduce that to at least start losing weight. I would recommend that people, if they're seriously overweight, I would recommend they stop drinking altogether, at least during the weight loss phase. You can drink spirits, because spirits don't have any carbohydrates, so whiskey or vodka, that sort of thing, but keep it down.
Is there a room from all that you mentioned? Is there a specific cyclical pattern that we can follow? So maybe 15 days to 30 days of strict diet, and then maybe we can.
If you go here, LHFliving.com community, I have a forum there, and it's free and it's anonymous, and you can put anything you like in there. There's several headings, and they're obvious what they are, and you can sign in, and you can just use whatever name you want. You don't have to tell as much about yourself. You don't have to tell any personal details, but in there's all kinds of stories. There's people who are sharing stuff about what they're doing. And if people put questions in there, I will always answer. I will always answer questions about cycling, the weight loss process and that sort of thing. But everybody's different. Everybody has different needs. Everybody's sensitive to different things. I can't say that one solution fits all. The low inflammation diet for person A is different to a low inflammation diet for person B. And age is a big factor, your heritage. For Asians, for example, Asians people in your part of the world, they're much more prone to heart attacks than we are in the West because some sort of genetic thing is going on there. So you have to be stricter than us. And you have to be much stricter on waist-height ratio. So the waist-height ratio for Indians and Asians has to be tighter than it is for me, white people, Anglo-Saxon type, Caucasian, white Caucasian. So it's very, very personal. And I'm happy to work with people through the forum and through ultimatefitness.fi and through you, Fateh, in your form. But the point is, if we're going to cure this middle region, if we're going to deal with this middle region that I talked about, where we have the question marks, where you're going from, health, this is the area that we don't know about, this question mark. We have sickness here. We know a lot about sickness because that's what doctors are treating all the time. We know we know about all the 5 diseases. We know how to treat them. We don't want to be there. It's this area where we're interested in. We need to get data. We need lots of data from people who are doing it themselves at home, so that we can start dealing with it. So we can work out how to reverse inflammatory hysteresis and get people better, because there may be some people that will never get better. There's a very interesting book here, Time Savers Workout by John Little. He's the co-author of Body by Science. And chapter 3 heading title is that. And he published that in the same year. I published my theory of inflammatory hysteresis early 2019, late 2018. And this came out in September of last year, autumn of last year. And he talks in this chapter, he talks about inflammatory hysteresis in all but name. I couldn't believe it, because this guy has been in the training business for years, 20, 30, 40 years. And he's finally admitting that there are people who have stress and high insulin and don't respond to anything, unfortunately. So it's very important, very important. It is the root of disease.
Nick, thank you very much. I think everybody is very grateful for all the time. It's almost been 2 hours. So I think we'll wrap this up right now. So any parting message, anything that you would like to say?
No, thank you very much for coming. Please go to the community, lihfliving.com community. Give us your data anonymously through Fateh. Fateh's done a Google form. It looks great. You can give it here as well, and I will help you. But I need lots of data. And we want to tackle this hidden problem of insulin resistance and inflammatory hysteresis, because that's the key. It's undiagnosed and it's real, and people are walking around with it not knowing.
Okay, great, man. Enjoy. Have a good rest of the day, and thank you very much. Everybody is very grateful for having you here, and we're already getting a lot of requests for you to have you here again. Right? I believe.
Well, I think next time I'd like to do a whole thing on exercise and high-intensity strength training, and why the protocols that I use and why it's so good for insulin resistance. I'll give you some case studies.
Perfect. Yeah, absolutely. I'll be getting in touch with everybody who attended and asking for some more detailed feedback in the Facebook group. So, but thanks a lot for doing this. And guys, do provide Nick as much data as you can. I'm sure whenever you guys get your next blood test, do just give him your data either through that form or on his forum, right? So yeah, great. Everybody have a good rest of the day. Nick, enjoy your day. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. Bye.
Bye.